Welcome back to Focus in our show about remembering. This is a picture of Helen Edel taken in 2006 with her grandchildren here in Canada. Edel escaped the Nazis in 1942 by hiding in plain sight with a Nazi family. She died in 2014. Regg Cohn is a writer and journalist and also son of Helen Edel and father of the two children we just saw right there. Thank you for being on the show and talking about this story. Why is it important to remember what happened to your mom and what happened to the millions of others?
Well, thinking of that photograph and my two grandchildren, Helen Edel lost her parents, my grandparents. I never got to see them. My children, at least, were able to see their grandmother. This story was important to her. It's a story that I grew up with, and passing that story on to the generations is critical. People forget, even with the best of intentions, the Holocaust, even all wars, dim historically. They fade into history. People called in Eastern Europe the slaughter of all these Jews, 6 million Jews, a forgotten Holocaust. And so the importance of my mother's story and why she wanted, even though she was a private person, the reason why she shared it with us, but not publicly, but the reason she, in fact, recorded an oral history, a testimonial, was to ensure that it would not be forgotten, that the details would be recorded. And that has been helpful, I think, in this story, in terms of the reader response, is people finding the actual journey, the details of how she encountered danger, about how she survived, that will to survive, and how her parents did not.
And this in a week of remembrance of the sacrifice, the soldiers and those that lost their lives in the war, is there a danger that we take something like the Holocaust and reduce it to a few fragments of memory like we do with the First World War, the trenches and no man's land?
Absolutely, and people who have been researching the Holocaust understand that while it is a uniquely evil event in terms of the Nazi genocide against the Jews, we see these kinds of parallels. Genocide continues. And if we don't remember the sacrifice of our own soldiers, if we don't remember the danger for the victims, it will keep happening. And the Holocaust happened roughly 70 years ago. We have to keep remembering so it doesn't happen again.
And the way we remember is so important because between the wars, if you think about the Remembrance Day ceremonies between the wars, they become some sort of a jingoistic almost tone to them. They begin to help propagate the next war in '39. How do we ensure that when we talk about the Holocaust, when we talk about service, sacrifice, and we see these pictures, that we're talking about this never happens again?
Well, an interesting example is that in Ukraine, where this particular memorial event for the Holocaust 70 years ago took place this past summer, they are themselves facing a war, a civil war, a war against Russian aggression. And some of the new leadership in Ukraine has been telling people, because the country is preoccupied by its own existential struggle, how did they find time to remember the death of these Jews so long ago? And some of their leaders said at this event, for example, we have to remember our own history. We have to take hold of our own history and some of the atrocities that Ukraine itself was party to, albeit under Nazi occupation. If we're going to go forward as an independent and sovereign country, we have to know our own history, good and bad. So that memory is a piece of the whole structure.
How do people find your mother's story and what you've written?
Well, the response has been quite overwhelming. Jews for whom the story is very personal, who have connections to Eastern Europe and the Holocaust, from non-Jews for whom the universal story really resonates. It's quite touching. I think they are themselves surprised by just how awful it was.
And we just saw the banner on the bottom of the screen there that shows you how to be able to find Martin's story about his mom. Thank you so much for being with us today, Martin.
Thank you, Alan.
Appreciate that.